Welcome back, Canadian Baseball Network fans, to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. We have another exciting guest today, Jim Callis of MLB Pipeline. Most fans will recognize the name from his top 100 prospects list and top 30 prospects lists throughout Major League Baseball. We're excited today to talk to him about some Canadians specifically and some Blue Jays prospects. We're going to dive into it all with the man that knows those guys better than anyone. We are thrilled to welcome the Canadian Baseball Network podcast from MLB Pipeline, Jim Callis. Jim, how's it going?
Good. Going good. It's crazy, but even though it's cold here in Chicago, the college season, I think we're about 2.5 weeks away from that starting, and spring training's right around the corner. It's like we're getting ready for another season.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's end of January, beginning of February when this comes out. So you're probably pretty busy though as the days tick away into the spring.
Yeah, this might be as crazy as the draft gets. Like the most concentrated busyness is like on that draft weekend where it's draft and futures game, high school America game, and working like 21-hour days and not eating, and that's insane. But in terms of extended busyness, this is probably the busiest time of year as we're trying to I do 10 top 30 prospects lists that I'm trying to do simultaneously right now and trying to hopefully get those done before I go off to spring training. So this is probably the biggest weight on my shoulders for an extended period of time for the whole year. But it's good. It means that another season's going to be here soon.
Of course, and yeah, we're with how busy you are, we're really thankful that you were able to take the time today. But the top 100 prospects list just came out a few days ago, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So before we get into the Canadians and some of the Blue Jays prospects on that list, can you just kind of take us through what the process is for establishing the top 100 and what kind of collaboration goes on?
Yeah, it's so there's three of us at MLB.com who kind of work on that list, and it's me and Jonathan Mayo and Sam Dykstra. And it's similar. Before I came to MLB.com, I was at Baseball America, and I want to say we did our first top 100 Baseball America in 1990, one of my first couple of years there at Baseball America. So I've been doing them for a while, and the process is kind of similar. But at MLB.com, so Sam and Jonathan and I, we start by making our own personal lists of the top 125 prospects to give us extra guys to work with. And then we kind of combine those in a spreadsheet, and then we talk about them. So we'll make some adjustments. It's not just straight math. So we'll make some adjustments, and then we send the list out to, I don't know. We get a bunch of feedback. We got feedback from at least 30 people in baseball. We send out to a bunch of people. And some people weigh in and they'll give us a couple thoughts. And some people weigh in and they'll give us thoughts on like 50 players on the list. So we get a bunch of feedback and we make some adjustments based on that. And then because anybody goes to our site and you see we have reports on all these guys with scouting grades, we'll also vet the grades. We'll vet the individual grades, and then we'll look and see, especially apples to apples. If we have two outfielders and they've kind of gotten to the same level, does the guy who ranks ahead, the guy higher rated outfielder, have better tools? Now, granted, if you have one guy who's been in AAA and one guy who's been in A-ball, you can have some leeway because one guy's proven more and there's floor and ceiling. But we'll kind of look at it from that way too, and then we'll, maybe tinker with a little bit at the end. But it's a pretty involved process. And I appreciate, we get so much feedback from people in the industry, and I always feel good about that. It's not just the three of us. And when we do our list, it's not just, hey, we just, this is who we like. I mean, that's based on essentially 12 months of conversations we've had about these players, leading up to forming the list. But we get so much input from the industry on the list that I think it helps us really fine tune it and make it as good as we can make it.
Now, would that be input from, I'm assuming, scouts, front office personnel, that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Analysts, like the gamut. I think there might be a GM or two who weighs in. We send it to a bunch of people, but it could be GMs, it could be assistant GMs, scouting directors, farm directors, pro scouting directors, like I said, analysts. It's a wide range of people. And then if you factor in all the people we talked to during the year, because I know, I'm just we have a bunch of draft guys on this list because it was a pretty special draft in 2023. But I'm trying to think of Paul Skeens. Like, how many people did I personally talk to about Paul Skeens last year? 20 or 30? Like, so it's feedback. Like, we're basing our opinions on what we heard during the year, but then we get direct feedback on the list from a wide variety of people as well.
And you travel all over. So how often do you get to see a lot of these guys? Would you say it's pretty consistently, say the top 100 even? Would you say you've seen each of them?
No, I mean, we don't go to as many minor league games as you might think because we're running around with the draft, like in spring training. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I guess I should. It would be. I haven't done the exercise. It'd be interesting for me to go through and see how many of these guys I've seen individually. Um, the nice thing is, so much has changed since I got into the business. Like I've been doing this since I guess I've been working full time since December of 1988, and I've been fortunate. I've pretty much done the same thing forever. I've done it for a couple different companies, Baseball America, Stats Inc., and then back to Baseball America and MLB.com. But when I started, like there was no internet. There was I remember when I met my wife and she had a computer with a modem and you could download stuff at 300 baud on America Online. Like that was like high tech. And now like I can like on my phone call up video of just about anybody and all this data. But like so even the people you haven't seen in person, there's video of all these guys. So like I haven't seen Sebastian Walcott of the Rangers. He's probably the most inexperienced player on our list or youngest player on the list. But there's plenty of video that exists of Sebastian Walcott. So you can look at that stuff. And then, we've got access to Synergy, which is tremendous, especially for the draft. But, it also covers, I think, AA and AAA. So, and again, even Twitter, like you can find video of guys. Like if it's some obscure guy, there's times where I was like, oh, I can't find video of this guy. I'll go see if there's any video on Twitter. And usually somebody's posted video of some obscure guy on Twitter. So it's, even though I haven't seen him in person, you can lay eyes on all these guys. Like when I started, like the conceive of that would have been unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's funny you say social media. I just did a story on a Canadian that committed to Wabash Valley. And he said that was one of the biggest things that surprised him about the recruiting process was how much attention he got on social media. So it's just crazy how big of an impact that can have.
Yeah, especially like if you think about if it's a pitcher or a hitter, you can get. It's not going to be on. It's obviously better. You could see more, and you could do different angles. When you're in person, you can see whatever angle you want to see or bear down what you want to see. But like, just be able to look at a guy's delivery or look at a guy's swing. Like, you put a 60-second video on Twitter, and you can see that stuff. Like, it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. So I want to jump in. There's two Canadians on the top 100 list. Tyler Black, of the Milwaukee Brewers, came in at number 46, and Owen Caissie right after him at number 47 of the Chicago Cubs. So let's talk a little bit about Tyler Black first. What is it about his game that you think Milwaukee Brewers fans should be most excited about?
Well, I think his hitting ability is the most exciting part of his game. And I'll admit, well, I'm gonna go back and look at this. So he was the 33rd overall pick in 2021, and the way we covered the draft is Jonathan Mayo and I split the country in half, and I have the Midwest, so I had Tyler Black at Wright State, and I liked him, but I thought the Brewers, I'll admit, overdrafted him by about a round. I thought he was like a second, third round pick. I didn't think he was a supplemental first round pick. But one thing he could really do that was clear was he could hit. Like I want to say the year that they drafted him, I think they opened the year against Vanderbilt and Kumar Rocker, and he might have hit a double off Kumar Rocker if my memory serves, and he kind of impressed against. And I think the second series they played Alabama and they had a third round pick, and he did well in those series. And then he played, Wright State's a very good program, but it's not like a top league like the SEC or the ACC where you're playing top competition. So he could hit, but I thought he was kind of like, okay, he can hit. I'm not sure what else he does is really that great. And I think I underrated him as a runner. I think he's got plus speed. We saw he stole 55 bases last year. And I don't think he's a big time, like he's not going to hit 30 home runs, but he did hit 55 extra base hits last year. And I just think he's going to be a guy who he's definitely hit for average. He's definitely going to get on base. He's probably going to have close to average power.
The pitch home. Black swings and hammers this to left center field. Dunn goes back. Warning track wall. Looks up, and Tyler Black's got himself a 3-hit night. This one a 414-foot homer.
He can run. He's going to make an impact on the bases. He's had, I want to say, some shoulder issues maybe even surgery when he was in college. So I don't think he throws great. That's probably the biggest knock on his game. But I do think with his speed, there's some versatility. Is he a third baseman? Is he an outfielder? Wherever. But I do think he can just really, really hit. And in today's game, guys who can put the bat on the ball consistently and make quality contact are hard to come. I don't know how anybody hits, man. When you're talking about video, when you look at video of these pitches, like guys are throwing 98 and the ball's like like a wiffle ball or break, these 85-mile-an-hour breaking balls that like sweep across the plate. I don't know how anybody gets hits today. So guys who can consistently make quality contact, I don't think have ever been valued as much as they are now. And that's Tyler's best attribute. So I think he's really well suited to do that. Like I said, the big question is probably what position does he wind up at? I think personally, for me, I think he probably fits best at second base. Like, I don't know if he's got the arm for third, but they'll find out some way to get him in the lineup. And I think he's going to hit.
Yeah, and I think that one of those injuries, we've actually had Tyler on this podcast a couple of times right after he was drafted. And then actually, I think it was the day before he was going to Milwaukee to receive the co-minor league player of the year. One of those injuries was a scapula injury, I believe, in the minor leagues. Broke his scap, something that sounded incredibly painful, at least.
And I want to say, I think he had shoulder surgery going into his draft year at Wright State. I don't think he threw well that spring. And so there was a question as to what exactly he was. But I at the time, I thought he was like, okay, maybe he's a plus hitter. Everything else is kind of average or fringy, and I sold him a little short. And he just has come out and played real, and he was banged up in 2022 and didn't have a great year, but last year he had one of the better years in the minors, and he could just really, really hit.
Yeah, and one of the things that we did talk to him about was that speed, and he said that he really put an emphasis on that. From the people that you have talked to, how much is that kind of put him on the map even more? You mentioned the 55 bases, but just the base running ability in general.
Yeah, no, I mean, it has helped. It has helped. And I want to say, I think I had him as more of an average runner in college. So I think he has gotten a little bit quicker, but especially when you have the rule changes and they're trying to put more emphasis on speed in the major leagues, like obviously he could take advantage of that. I think the speed and his aggressiveness enhances power in terms of, stretching singles into doubles and doubles into triples. I think like if he ran this well, this consistently in college, I think he would have been even more highly regarded.
Do you think that would have improved his draft where he was drafted?
Maybe. I mean, he went 33rd, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much higher he could have gone, but like I would have held him in higher regard. I wouldn't have thought he was overdrafted a little bit, I guess. But yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit. But yeah, it's like I did not see the plus speed coming, I'll be honest.
So one of the things we like to ask when we have like higher end minor leaguers that are a little bit closer to the big leagues is, do they think they're ready? And he, without hesitation, said yes. So I'll ask you that question. Is there a chance that Tyler Black can break north with Milwaukee after spring training?
I do. I mean, he hasn't played a ton in AAA, but he played 40 games, and like you'll see guys jump from AA. So and he played well there. So you can argue there really isn't that much for him to prove. I think it's just a matter of where does he fit in their lineup and at what position. Like I do think he might be better suited, honestly, to be an outfielder in the long run, but like they have more outfielders than they know what to do with. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't know if they have an obvious third baseman right now, do they?
I don't believe so. And they've had a weird offseason. It wasn't quite clear what direction they were going. It seemed like early on, and they signed Rhys Hoskins recently. So I don't really know what to think about that team and his position. And
it's a weird division where everybody's kind of in contention. I mean, I'm looking here. So I'm going to say yes. I just wanted to call up. I was calling up Roster's Resource because I will admit I did not have every team's projected lineup memorized. The projected starting third baseman for the Brewers right now, and I was looking at our depth chart too, is Andrew Monasterio. So I will say, no offense to Andrew Monasterio, that yes, I think Tyler Black could break camp with the team. And like, I'm not, I don't know if they play him at second. I know they like Bryce Trang. I'm not the biggest Bryce Trang fan in the world. I just don't think there's a lot of impact in his bat. And I mean, he might be you could argue that Tyler Black might be their best option at third base and second base. So yeah, I think he's got a chance to do that.
we're obviously we've spoken to him a few times, as I said, and we'd love to see him obviously break camp with the break camp after spring training. But regardless of how that goes, I want to talk a little bit about the next guy on your list who came in right at number 47. That's Owen Caissie of the Chicago Cubs, a little bit younger, 21. Tell us a little bit about what kind of stood out for him and gave him that ranking in your top 100.
Yeah, Owen's he's one of the best power hitting prospects in the game. You look at the exit velocities he puts up, and his top end exit velocities would rank near the top among major leaguers. And he's coming off his age 20 season, so he's still pretty young. He's still growing. He was one of the younger players in the AA Southern League last year, and yet he finished in the top 5 in hitting, on-base percentage, slugging, home runs. It's massive power. If there are a little bit of a swing and miss concerns with him, but he did get better over the course of last season. He's been pushed aggressively, and he's always handled the challenge. He's actually won championships the last 2 years. I mean, this is a guy who could be a 35 to 40 home run guy in the big league level. He's that good.
Well, 3-2. Swing, and Caissie gets into one to right center, and this ball is gone again. Owen Caissie's 3rd home run of the ball game.
The reason he doesn't rank higher is, he's not an up the middle guy. He does have some arm strength. He's a below average runner, so he's probably, he's left field, right field. He's not going to play center. But, if you were to take a look in the top 100 as a whole, he'd be one of the top 4 or 5 power hitters on that entire list.
So he's behind, obviously, Pete Carroll Armstrong, who made his big league debut last year. Where does he kind of rank in that Cubs outfield? Cubs had 7 top 100 prospects this year. So where do you see him kind of fitting in going forward?
Yeah, the nice thing is, obviously there's 3 outfielders, but like Pete Crow Armstrong is going to be the center fielder of the future for the Cubs. He's such a good defender, but I think Owen's going to wind up in left or right. Now I don't think they're counting on him this year. They've signed, Ian Happ and Suzuki to longer term deals. They have a few years remaining on their contracts, but I do think that Caissie's power is so good that he's going to be ready end of this year, beginning of 2025. When he's ready, they'll put him in the lineup. Maybe he sees some DH time because Ian Happ can be a pretty good defender out there. But eventually, he's got much higher offensive ceiling than Ian Happ. So eventually, I think he's in the long run going to be probably the left fielder in Chicago. Maybe right field too, because he does have the arm. But they have other outfielders. Kevin Alcantara is another outfielder we have on our top 100 prospects list in the Cubs organization. But I've got him ahead of Alcantara. They do have some outfield depth. They have some guys in the big leagues. But I just think his power is special. He's the best power hitting prospect in the organization, and they'll make room for him. It's other guys who are going to have to be fighting for spots. I'm not worried about him eventually claiming a spot there.
So I wrote an article for the Canadian Baseball Network a few days ago, and it was my prediction of 3 Canadians who could be the next ones to make their big league debut. Tyler Black was obviously number 1. I think he'll probably be first. I had Owen Caissie on that list. I don't know if that was a little too optimistic.
No, I think he'll be up by the end of the year. He's going to play this year in AAA, and if he's always performed. If he performs, I don't know why he wouldn't be up toward the end of the year.
Yeah. So that's where I know you had him. I believe his ETA is 2025, but I thought maybe he performed really well in AA. So I wanted to get your thoughts on if 2024 is realistic for him.
Yeah, I do think it is. The ETA, I don't think he's going to be a regular for them until 2025. But the other thing that could change too is if Owen Caissie keeps playing like he did, and it was interesting because last year at the beginning of the year he pretty much mashed the whole year in AA. But the beginning of the year he was striking out at a 40% clip, which is not sustained. You can't sustain success doing that. But that's when the Southern League was using pre-tacked balls and guys were really spinning the ball, getting crazy RPMs, and everybody was striking out. And when they went back to normal baseballs, his strikeout rate came down to 25%, which is sustainable with his power. He can have success doing that. So if he continues to mash, what if Ian Happ gets hurt in July and the Cubs are trying to contend and Owen Caissie's hitting 280 with 17 homers in AAA halfway through the season, they could call him up then. So I think we could see him this year for sure.
Spring is on the horizon, which means so is March break. So why not swing into spring with the Baseball Zone's 21st annual March Break Baseball Camp? and it takes place from March 11th to 15th, and anyone aged 5 to 13 years old can sign up. What better way for your child to spend March break than staying active and honing their baseball skills at the Baseball Zone's top-class facilities? For more info and to register, head to thebaseballzone.ca.
And I hate to do this. I know a lot of people hate comparisons, but do you have any comparisons for Black or Caissie as kind of how they project at the big league level?
I do not have a great comp on either guy. Like, I'm not a big comp guy because
I'm not either, but I know some people are, so I had to ask.
No, I don't mind you. And I relay if I have a comp, I will relay it, but I don't like forcing comps. And it's interesting because comps were created before we had all this video. It was the main reason they were created was to paint a physical picture of a guy, so that if you're filing a scouting report in like 1982, when they thought that you'd carry a phone around that would have more computing power than any computer at the time, and you could actually see the guy, like the comps were like, hey, this guy resembles, this guy physically, so you could get an idea of what he looked like, since there was no film or video. But now I don't have a great comp on either one of those guys.
Were there any Canadians that were close to cracking the top 100, or was it really Caissie and Black from the get-go for you guys?
Now, I will have to admit, I do not probably track the Canadian origins as much as you guys do. So give me some Canadian candidates, and I can tell you how close they were.
I from the get-go, I knew Caissie and Black were going to be on there. I didn't expect anybody else, but I was just curious if in that hot top 125, top 150 that you guys kind of break down, if there were any other Canadians. I don't expect you to kind of know the Canadians off the top of your head, but I just thought.
Well, I'm going to your website and I'm looking at your list of Canadians in the minor leagues. So
Damiano Palmigiani.
No, he wasn't particularly close, but he looked really good in the fall league. Like he was a guy who wasn't really on my radar as a top guy, and he's legit. So I wouldn't say close to the top 100. One of the guy, he wasn't like we kind of have a running list in our minds. Well, not sure. Denzel Clark would be in that next group.
Yeah.
I'm just scrolling through your wonderful website here as I scroll down. I think Denzel Clark, there's so many Canadians.
Yeah, and I think Palmigiani, that performance in the fall league was probably why he jumped to mind first. I don't believe he's really in that top 100, top 150 group. But
yeah, I'd say I'm looking at this. I've scrolled through and I've gone down to independent league players, so I don't have to go any further. But yeah, I think Denzel Clark, who's super athletic in the A's system, is a guy who when we got to the feedback stage, and he got some votes when we did our initial 125s, like he was. Yeah, that probably gave us a group of like 150 or so candidates, and he got some mild feedback to, possible top 100, keep an eye on him, that type of stuff. So I'd say he would be next up. Do we have any Canadians in the 2024 draft? Yeah, I don't know that any of the top guys, like Brendan Lawson is probably the best, but I don't think he's necessarily the type of guy right now you'd say, okay, he's going to jump on the top 100.
Maybe another guy I'm looking at it now, Emilian Petrie at the University of Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are both in my half the country, because Lawson's the guy, if I remember correctly. Is he going to P27 Academy in South Carolina? He is, right?
I believe so. He's an Ontario Blue Jay guy up here.
Yeah, that's who it is. So both Lawson and Petrie are in my half the country, and they didn't make our top 100 draft prospects list, which we will continue to update and expand up to a 250 during the season. But they both had some support. So yeah, I'd say Denzel Clark is probably the next Canadian who'd be on tap for the top 100.
Okay, so there it is, Canadian baseball fans. A little bit of insight behind the top 100 and the Canadians on it. Now let's talk a little bit of the Blue Jays. It wouldn't be the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. We didn't mention the Blue Jays. 2 Jays on the top 100, Ricky Tiedemann at 29 and Orelvis Martinez at 89, I believe. I just had it up. Anyways, Tiedemann, give us your thoughts on Tiedemann, because a lot of Blue Jays fans are very high on him and expect him to make an impact very soon. Is he as good as a lot of Blue Jays fans think he is?
Yeah, I mean, he looked like it in the fall league, which is predominantly a hitter's league. We have him as the second highest ranked left-handed pitching prospect in baseball, behind Kyle Harrison, the Giants. And I mean, it's 3+ pitches. I mean, it's plus fastball, plus slider, plus changeup. Yeah, he's moved very quickly because his stuff is so good. Yeah, the question with him, he needs to throw a few more strikes and he needs to prove he can stay healthy. He was dinged up last year. He had shoulders and biceps injuries issues. Sorry, got tongue tied there. Shoulders and biceps issues last year, so only pitched 44 innings before he got to the fall league. I think if he throws average strikes, he's going to be pretty good, and stays healthy. The thing is, and I don't think he's injury prone, but he's only pitched 122 innings in 2 years of pro ball. So, I mean, he's not necessarily at the point where, like this year, I do think he's talented enough where he can make his presence felt in Toronto this year. But I don't know, like between the minors and the fall league last year, he probably threw 70 innings, maybe. So I don't know how many innings you can really stack on him this year. You're like maybe 120, 125. So they're gonna have to manage his innings carefully this year. But there's no question. If he's healthy, he's one of the best pitching prospects in baseball.
So it's funny, Jackson and I were actually talking just before we got on here, and this is by no means a comparison, but the Jays also had a very high pitching prospect not long ago in Nate Pearson. So can you just kind of talk a little bit about how unpredictable prospects really are?
Well, I think especially pitchers, because the pitchers are so volatile in just the injuries to begin with. And Nate Pearson's a perfect example. Nate Pearson's pure stuff is crazy. I saw Nate Pearson throw 104 miles an hour in the Fall Stars game in Arizona Fall League. I also saw Pete Alonso in the same game homer off 103 mile an hour fastball from Nate Pearson. But Pearson throws so hard that I just don't know that anybody can throw that hard that consistently and stay in one piece. So on one hand, you get really excited, like, oh man, this guy could be a frontline starter. But then in the back of your mind, it's almost like the sicker a guy's stuff is, the harder it is for the guy's body to hold up. Like you constantly see, Joe Sheehan, who's one of the best baseball writers out there, is constantly showing charts. If you look at a chart, you can look at 3 years ago, whatever you want to take it from in recent memory, of the 10 hardest throwing starting pitchers in baseball. Let's say, and I don't have the chart in front of me, but if you looked at 3 years ago, like 7 out of the 10 guys have been hurt since then. Like it's just, Jake DeGrom has unbelievable stuff, but he can't stay healthy. Like his stuff's like too good for his body. And like, I do think guys are throwing harder and torquing the ball and spinning it better than ever. And they keep finding more velocity and finding more spin, and guys just don't hold up. So with the pitchers, it's really, really difficult. With the hitters, I feel like they're kind of easier to project. I think that the trickiest thing, and you will always have the guys, like there will always be kind of outliers who are good all the way up through the minors, but they can't make that final jump to the big leagues. That's going to happen. But I do think the hitters you feel more comfortable with, especially, when you see, just cite 2 Blue Jays, Vlad Jr. hit from day one and Bo Bichette hit from day one, and you felt good about those guys. The tricky thing, I think, with the position players, especially from when, based on the comments we get from fans, is I don't think people necessarily are always cognizant of the capability of guys to play positions. Like Vlad was always going to be kind of an iffy third baseman. I mean, he's still a great prospect, but like realistically, if you looked at Vlad, you're like, okay, that guy's going to be a first baseman. And sometimes you'll see guys who come up as, start their pro careers as catchers, and they have no shot to catch in the big leagues. And people be like, oh, this catcher, like back in the day, I'll say another Canadian, Joey Votto was a catcher. But Joey Votto wasn't going to, and so was Justin Morneau, right? Wasn't Morneau a catcher?
Yes, I believe he was. Yeah.
So like you get all excited, and it's like, yeah, but those guys aren't going to catch in the big leagues. Like you can't, you have to factor that in. So I think you have to. Sometimes it may be difficult, especially from the fan side of things, to realistically assess what position the guy's going to play. But for hitters, you could kind of look at stuff, and especially now we have data, and you can look at how hard guys are hitting the ball and how much they're making contact and how much they're chasing. You could kind of feel pretty good about your hitting prognostications. But with pitchers, they can go bad anytime. Like for instance, MLB.com has been ranking prospects for 20 years. I was at Baseball America when they started. But on the first list in 2004, MLB.com's number one prospect was Joe Mauer. He was our number one prospect at Baseball America also. Hall of Famer. Pretty good number one prospect.
I was going to say, yeah, you hit on that one, I think.
Yeah. And I think our BA list was very similar. Number 2 on the MLB.com list was BJ Upton. who had a very, good major league career, not Hall of Famer, but very good big league career. And number 3 was Greg Miller. And everybody who's listening to this is like, who's Greg Miller? Well, Greg Miller never played in the big leagues. He was a pitcher, and he was the best pitching prospect in baseball. And he hurt his shoulder that year, and his stuff never bounced back. I remember one of the very early, I want to say maybe the second Baseball America Top 100 we did in 1991. Roger Salkeld was the top pitching prospect, I'm pretty sure, on that list. And Roger Salkeld got hurt. And I'm not sure if Roger Salkeld, Roger Salkeld did play briefly in the big leagues, but he was never the same. But like Brian Taylor, you still have some amateur scouts will tell you Brian Taylor is the best left-handed amateur pitching prospect they've ever seen. And Brian Taylor hurt his shoulder in an offseason, got in a brawl. His brother got in a fight, and he went in to intercede and wrecked his shoulder. And Brian Taylor never pitched in the big leagues. And so with pitchers, you just never know. It's very tough. And we don't, like, if you look at our top 100 list this year, we don't go out of our way to say, oh, we're not going to rank pitchers high. They're too risky. We didn't do it. But like Paul Skeens, who was the number 1 pick in last year's draft, is a pitcher from LSU. We ranked number 3. He's the only pitcher in our top 22. And it's not because we're scared and we didn't want to rank pitchers. I think we just felt like the hitters were better bets.
But he's the only pitcher in the top 22. I've like looked at the list a lot. I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, no, it's he's the only pitcher. And again, it wasn't like we made a conscious choice, like, hey, we should rank hitters against pitchers. But like it's like if you look at our pitchers, so he's at 3. Kyle Harrison's at 23. And I like Kyle Harrison, but like it's not a ton of strikes. Yeah, you wish he threw a few more strikes. Jackson Jobe was hurt last year. Cade Horton and Tommy John in college. Andrew Painter missed all of last year and won't be back until middle of this year with Tommy John. Tiedemann's next. He was hurt. Jacob Mizorowski hasn't pitched a ton. Rhett Lauder's fresh out of college. Like, it's not, I don't know. What would I say? Half those guys were hurt last year.
Yeah, it's funny when you dive into this list. Now, those guys you just named off, Harrison and Jobe and Horton, they don't seem to be quite at the level of Skeens.
No, I don't think that many guys are at the level.
Well, yeah, fair enough. But I mean, as far as the rankings in the top 100 go, it makes sense. But I will say one of my favorite things to do in my spare time is to look back on previous rankings and previous drafts and see who went where and where they are now. We're talking about guys that never made it or went high and kind of fizzled out. But that's what I do in my spare time a lot of the time. But
I often contemplate the same stuff. I often contemplate. I love to look back at the draft from 10 years ago. Although the funny thing is with the draft, I always get defensive isn't the right word. Maybe defensive from the team's sake. I do think when people like look back at how teams made picks, you have to contemplate how players were regarded at the time. It's very easy to look back 10 years and say, oh, that guy should have gone higher. Well, there are times like even in last year's draft, I'm not going to single a team out in particular, but like there's like as the draft's going on, like because I'm generally providing commentary on every pick of the first 10 rounds or on call to provide commentary live on every pick of the first 10 rounds. And there'll be picks and I'll be like, man, like they way overdrafted that guy. Or like, oh, I think they waited way too long on that guy. Look, I'm wrong a lot too, but I remember years ago, I couldn't believe Brian Reynolds lasted into the second round. I was like, what is going on here? Brian Reynolds is much better than this. And I was right on that one. I've been wrong on guys too. But yeah, it's always interesting. Like, I love it. Like, a lot of times get frustrated fans of a team like, oh, I can't believe our team drafted this guy. And it's like, you know what? That guy was a really good prospect when they drafted him. He just happened to get hurt.
Yeah, hindsight's 20/20 in this situation for sure. Not to jump around too much, but I do want to get to the other Blue Jay on this list, Orelvis Martinez. He's a really interesting player, I think, for Blue Jays fans because a lot of power, but there seems to be a lot high upside. But what kind of is his floor?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's got like a big gap, one of the bigger gaps, I think, on the top 100 between his floor and his ceiling. Now, like in terms of things he does really well. He's got huge power. It's probably well above average raw power. It could be 35 plus homer power. Now, the downside is he, instead of letting the power come naturally, and I want to say, I think he's hit more homers in the minors over the last 3 years than anybody. I might be wrong on that, but he's hit 86 homers in the last 3 minor league seasons, which I think is more than anybody's hit in the minor leagues. Now, the last 2 years, he's hit 203 in Double-A. And then last year he hit 243 between Double A and Triple A because he gets really aggressive. He did tone it down some last year, but he could be boom or bust. So you could dream on Orelvis Martinez hitting 35 homers a year, but there's also a scenario where he gets too aggressive, and when he faces even better pitching in the big leagues, those guys are going to exploit that, and he strikes out a ton, and he doesn't get to his power. It was encouraging. He hit better in AAA. AAA is kind of a hitter's level right now. He did strike out about 30% of the time in AAA, which is scary. And then defensively, he can really throw. I mean, it's definitely an arm for the left side of the infield. He's a below average runner. Like, they've played him at short. I don't think he's quick enough to play short. He finished the year playing second base. Like third base, like he's got the arm, but like the quick reactions, like the game would speed up on him a little bit. So he's a little polarizing. Like, you could dream like this is a 35 homer infielder, and then it's like, or you can also, if you want to be like the negative guy on him, the devil's advocate, you'd be like, like I worry about the swing and miss, and I'm not sure exactly where you play him. Like, I would think, Kevin Biggio kind of bounces around. Like, maybe he gets a chance to play third. We mentioned Damiano Palmisgiani earlier. Maybe Damiano Palmisgiani gets a chance to play third. Like, I think you'll see him. I think you'll see Orelvis in the big leagues at some point this year. But I also think he's the type of hitter who I bet he needs some time to adjust. Like, he's not the profile of a guy who steps into the big leagues and hits from day one. Like, I think he's going to have to figure out, really fine-tune that approach when he faces even better pitching.
Yeah, and he was definitely a guy that kind of came up a lot among fans as far as the Blue Jays didn't hit for a lot of power last year, and is he the solution, going forward? Like you said, who knows about that? But is he a guy that you think the Jays can rely on potentially in the coming year or two? Is he a potential solution out of spring training? With third base being open, I know Justin Turner was signed, but he's not really a third baseman anymore.
Yeah. I mean, no, he is. I think you said that very well, man. I think he's a potential solution. Would I count on him? I would not count on him because he swings and misses a lot, and those guys tend to have a little bit of a rough adjustment when they first get to the majors. So I could also see a scenario where he gets a chance earlier in the year and really struggles. He goes back to AAA, and then maybe he figures some things out, and then he's even better. He's better the second time around. Now, in his defense, I mean, he's only 22 years old. Like, he got to AAA at age 21. He's moved very quickly. He's had a lot of minor league success in terms of hitting for power. It's just, he's interesting, but I don't like. I worry a little bit that he's going to struggle when he first gets to the big leagues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, hitting's not easy, and I'll die on the hill that it's the hardest thing to do in sports. I'll ask you the same question that I did about the Canadians. Were there any Blue Jays prospects that were close to the top 100 that maybe just missed out in that 125, 150 range?
Not really. Like, they have their last two first-round picks, Arjun Amal and Brandon Barrera, are interesting guys. But, Barrera was hurt for a lot of last year, and, Amal has barely played, and he was a legit first-round pick, but he wasn't like slam dunk, you're putting him on the top 100 as soon as he signs type of guy. So, I would actually say no. I don't really think there was a guy who was close. I'd say those last two first-round picks would be their next two guys up on the list, but you'd like to see them, play a little bit more before you went there. Like, because I want to say Barrera, in terms of his career, he was 2022 first-round pick. He's pitched 20 innings in professional baseball, including, and that was it. So, I think those are next two guys, but neither was particularly close to making the top 100 quite yet.
Now, the final two questions for you. Then these are just general baseball questions, not related to Canadian baseball. Who is the best prospect going into a draft, or coming or that you've evaluated going into a draft or after being drafted, that you've seen? And that doesn't have to translate to the best big league career, but as far as prospect at the time.
I think the best draft prospect is also the best amateur prospect that I've ever seen, and that's Alex Rodriguez. Like, I was at Baseball America, and again, it was, this was pre-internet, pre-video, And I like the first time I heard of him, he almost played for the collegiate national team when he was in high school. And they could not work out a deal. Topps was doing baseball cards for Team USA back then, and they couldn't work out a deal for his baseball card rights, or he didn't want to give them up. And so he didn't. But I remember thinking, man, this guy must be pretty good. And the funny thing was, so he was the number one overall pick in 1993, but there was a lot of thought, even going on draft day, that Lou Piniella was managing the Mariners at the time, and he wanted a guy who could help him right away. And he wanted Darren Dreifort out of Wichita State, who did go straight to the big leagues. He made his pro debut in Los Angeles. He was the number 2 overall pick by the Dodgers, and that they were going to take Darren Dreifort. The Mariners were getting better, and they wanted that pitching. And Roger Youngward, who was this legendary scout, he was the guy who the owner in 87 wanted to draft a college pitcher. He's like, no, we got to take Griffey. He got them. He was a scouting director. He got them to take Alex Rodriguez, and Roger was an old school scout. Great guy. He was the area scout, the number 1 pick when the Mets took Darryl Strawberry. Just very well respected scout, and not given to hyperbole. You know, he was always very helpful when I was at Baseball America, but he wasn't going to pump guys up. And I remember in 1993, so I used to do these draft report cards for Baseball America, which I love doing. And you would have all these categories like best hitter, best power hitter, fastest runner, strongest arm, et cetera, et cetera. Like we'd have all these categories. And I remember doing the Mariners draft report card in 1993. And it's like best hitter, best power, best runner, strongest arm, best defender, closest to the big leagues, even though he's out of high school. And A-Rod played in the big leagues in 1994, his first full year in pro ball. He was a couple other categories. He was like 8 different categories was A-Rod. Like any category it could have been, it was A-Rod. And I remember telling Rogers, like, he just I said, this guy sounds ridiculous. I mean, I know we talked to other people on too, but just like, this guy sounds unbelievable. And I said, does he remind you of anybody? And again, Roger was not a guy who was given to hyperbole or wanted to put, pressure on anybody. But he said, yeah, he's like, he kind of he reminds me of Cal Ripken, but he's a better athlete, like a significantly better athlete. And I was like, geez. I mean, at that point, Cal Ripken was a couple years removed from being MVP and was, Gold Glove and Silver Slugger every year. And
you don't get a better comp than that, especially.
Yeah, even if he was Cal Ripken and like not as good an athlete, that still would have been a pretty good player. And like Roger was right. I mean, he was a big physical shortstop who was, and I'm not knocking Cal Ripken Jr., who was a lot more athletic than Cal Ripken Jr. was. And like, again, you talk about his career. I mean, he was in the big leagues as an 18-year-old, like in 1994. And then, he played a little bit in 1995. And then, his first full season in the big leagues in 1996, I guess A-Rod would have been 20. He should have been MVP. He won the batting title. He had 54 doubles. And that was year Juan Gonzalez won the MVP. And it should have been A-Rod. A-Rod was clearly the best player in the American League. And so I don't know that I'll ever see a better. I've said that. I get asked this question a lot. I'm getting old now, so I've been doing this for a while. If I see a better prospect than A-Rod, I cannot wait to see what that guy looks like, because for all, the PEDs, A-Rod hit almost 700 home runs in his career and was a Gold Glove shortstop. And yeah, he was more suited to play third base. He's a better shortstop than Derek Jeter, but when he went to the Yankees, it made more sense to put him at third. That guy, we're not going to get into the PD part, but you just look at what he did on the field. A-Rod's probably one of the top 5 or 10 players of all time. So anyway, and he was great right away. So anyway, if I see a better prospect than A-Rod, that guy's going to be pretty good. I'm looking forward to seeing what that might look like.
I would say so. That's a pretty good answer to that question.
He's the gold standard. You would have to be. A-Rod in his prime. A-Rod won batting titles. A-Rod hit. Like, I don't see as good as he was. I guess we weren't necessarily projecting A-Rod was going to hit 50 homers in a season and win batting titles and gold. But A-Rod, if you look at it, he won a batting title. He won 5 home run titles. He won 2 Gold Gloves at shortstop. Like, That's a pretty good player. He stole 329 bases in his career, even though he wasn't, like aggressively trying to steal. I mean, he's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no, fair answer. Fair. I think a lot of people will probably agree with that. So to close out, I just want to ask one more question about, and again, this isn't Canadian specific, this is just baseball in general. Who is one prospect that may not be spoken about enough, but you could see having a significant impact in the near future? Maybe not 2024, but 2025 even. Who's kind of one guy that people should keep an eye on?
I'm just trying to think of guys who are ranked a little low. Well, I mean, I will say we talked about him earlier. I'm not just saying this because I'm on the Canadian Baseball Network broadcast, but I'm telling you, Owen Caissie, Owen Caissie could be a 35 home run guy, and I think he flies. We did our own podcast today at MLB Pipeline, and we were asked like which guy in the top 100 do you think's a little, maybe undervalued or you like more than most, and my guy was Owen Caissie. So I'm not just saying that because I'm on your podcast. I'm not trying to play to the crowd in Canada here.
You're not trying to get points with the Canadian crowd, are you?
No, I'm not. That's legit. I will tell you another guy who I like a lot. I loved him in the draft. And he won the first round, but like he was hard to see because he never really played a full season. And that's Chase DeLauter of the Guardians. And he had a weird college career at James Madison where he hit 402 with like a 1235 ops over a 3-year career. But he had the pandemic in his first season, so it was like a short season. Then James Madison only played a 28-game schedule in his second season, and then he broke his left foot in his third season. So he never really played a lot in college, but he was good at the Cape Cod League, and he had a foot injury, so he didn't even in his pro debut last year. He only played 57 games. It was a foot injury he had in his draft year that he was still recovering from and required an additional surgery. He was really good in the fall league, but I think Chase DeLauter is just an unbelievable. He's 6'4", 235. He's really athletic. He hits everywhere he goes. He's got really good plate discipline. And I do think that Chase DeLauter is probably a guy on our list who a year from now could be a top 3 or 5 prospect in baseball. Like a bunch of guys are going to graduate off our list, but I do think he's that talented. And I just don't think people talk about him a whole lot right now. Because like I said, I mean, he's only played 57 pro games. He never really had a full college season. And he was at James Madison, but I think he's kind of I mean, he's not really a sleeper. He's 31 on our top 100, but I do think he could be a guy who could be a top 5 prospect at the end of this season.
Jim, this was a lot of fun. Great insight. And again, we know how busy you are this time of year, so we really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, yeah, no, anytime, Matt. I appreciate you guys having me on. You guys have an unbelievable site. I email back and forth with Bob Elliott constantly. He already thanked me for coming on the podcast before I appeared on the podcast because that's Bob, but
we really appreciate it. And I think our listeners and our followers are going to be really excited to hear what you have to say about not only the Canadian prospects, but the Blue Jays prospects.
Well, I appreciate you saying, man. I'm going to say one thing. It'll be a little corny, but I'm going to thank Canada for one of my closest friends and basically the guy who helped me launch it, Alan Simpson, who founded Baseball America. Canadians actually started the magazine in Canada in his garage.
Yep.
He wanted to have a U.S. publishing address, so he drove it across the border and into northern Washington. But no, my favorite Canadian of all time will always be Alan Simpson, who I wish, like Bob, like he was nominated for it's not the Spink Award anymore, whatever the Writers Award in the Hall of Fame, but Alan. Baseball owes Alan a huge debt of thanks because all this prospect coverage that everybody loves and is doing, it all comes from Alan. Like Alan loved this. Alan worked for the Gold Panthers in Alaska, loved all, like I've never known anybody who's been as passionate about all aspects of baseball, whether it's little league or independent ball, all of it. Alan loves it. The draft, obviously. And Alan, when the Sporting News moved from being the Bible of baseball to trying to cover all sports, Alan missed the draft coverage. He missed the minor league coverage. And so Alan is crazy, and his wife Jill deserves a lot of credit too for like encouraging him to go after his dream. Alan didn't know anything about publishing. He's just like, I'm gonna start a baseball magazine in my garage in Canada, and all this stuff, all these things that people do, like ranking prospects, best tools, draft rankings. Alan did all that from scratch. Nobody was doing that at the time, and Alan was doing this stuff. There was no internet. If like some scout told you about a player, you couldn't go look up his stats or video. You had to, Alan's unbelievable. So anyway, I don't know how I got sidetracked, but it's whenever I think of Canada, I think of Alan. Thank you, Canada. I will thank Canada Brown Simpson, who should be in the Hall of Fame in the writer's wing. And he's really the father of all the prospect coverage we have today.
That story is Canadian baseball history, and I honestly can't think of a better way to wrap up this conversation, but thank you again.
Thanks, Matt.
Again, another guest, more great insight, this time on prospects from somebody that knows more than anyone that I've ever spoken to, Jackson.
Yeah, a real treat to have Jim on with us, someone of such stature in baseball writing. And as you heard, the way he talks about prospects, and he knows everyone, right? He sees all and knows all. It's very interesting when he talks about that. One thing that stood out to me about that, Matt, was how high he was, or how high he is on Owen Caissie, the Cubs prospect. And, we've talked about him a little bit on this show, but I think, him kind of raising the alarm, like, hey, this guy can hit 35 to 40 home runs maybe at the big league level, I think will certainly, get some attention from our listeners for sure.
Yeah, when he said 35 to 40, that is major power at the big league level. And it's not surprising given looking kind of if you really dive into who Owen Caissie is, but to hear somebody like Jim who knows this stuff better than anyone say something like that, it really gives you that insight into how good Owen Caissie potentially could be for the Cubs. The Cubs, they're looking at Cody Bellinger. They're clamoring for Cody Bellinger, but they got another left-handed hitter in Owen Caissie that they should be very high on. I also found it interesting about Caissie, how he said they'll find a way to fit him in. And obviously a 35, 40 home run guy, you find a way to fit him in. But how other prospects and other players, even on the big league roster now, maybe shifted around to make room for Caissie eventually. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and also because, the Cubs are set in the corners, like you talked about, right? If you've got Crow Armstrong in the middle, and then you've got Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki, right? But, both of those players are kind of in their prime, right? So you're looking at it and thinking, and I think you made a good point in saying, look, what if Ian Happ is injured in July? All of a sudden, that really speeds up the timeline. And that's, the story of prospects in many cases is that is how they get their opportunity, right? Sometimes it's not always just by, forcing your way into a big league roster, but also just, hey, we got a spot open here for you. And so I think, continuing to play well and proving himself at AAA will be massive and a huge next step for him. And sort of putting yourself in that conversation where there is an injury and you're able to step in. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And of course, Tyler Black as well, friend of the show. He talked a little bit about him and how he's really been on the rise. And he noted sort of the lack of maybe third base depth that the Brewers have, and about how that could lead to Tyler Black, making his way onto a roster earlier. So again, some more good news there for a Canadian prospect and friend of the show.
Yeah, and I think, Canadian baseball fans look at guys like Tyler Black, Owen Caissie. We cover guys like Black and Caissie heavily, and we know how good they are. But sometimes it's good to get that outside perspective from somebody that covers all of baseball, because when you see it with the Blue Jays, you focus on your team so much, you kind of get so narrowed in on them, you lose kind of big picture. So it's really interesting to hear Jim talk about both Black and Caissie potentially making it to the big leagues this year. It is very exciting for Canadian baseball fans.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Canadian Baseball Network for extensive and comprehensive coverage of the latest in Canadian baseball. And the Baseball Zone, Canada's leading instructional baseball academy and training home to thousands of MLB pro, college, and youth baseball players.